Leo Tolstoy, War and Peace, Book 1, Part 1, Chapter 4. Anna Pavlovna smiled and promised to take Pierre in hand. She knew his father to be a connection of Prince Vasili's. The elderly lady who had been sitting with ma tante rose hurriedly and overtook Prince Vasili in the anteroom. All the affection of interest she had assumed had left her kindly and tear-worn face, and it now expressed only anxiety and fear. "What can you tell me about my son Boris, Prince?" said she, hurrying after him into the anteroom. She pronounced the name Boris with particular emphasis on the O. "I can't remain any longer in Petersburg. Tell me what news I may take back to my poor boy." Although Prince Vasili listened reluctantly and not very politely to the elderly lady, even betraying some impatience, she gave him an ingratiating and appealing smile, and took his hand that he might not go away. "What would it cost you to say a word to the Emperor, and then he would be transferred to the Guards at once?" she said. "Believe me, Princess, I am ready to do all I can," answered Prince Vasili. "But it is difficult for me to ask the Emperor. I should advise you to appeal to Rumyantsev through Prince Golitsyn. That would be the wisest course." The elderly lady was a Princess Drubetskaya, belonging to one of the best families in Russia, but she was poor, and having long been out of society had lost her former influential connections. She had now come to Petersburg to procure an appointment in the Guards for her only son. It was, in fact, solely to meet Prince Vasili that she had obtained an invitation to Anna Pavlovna's reception, and had sat listening to the Vicomte's story. Prince Vasili's words frightened her. An embittered look clouded her once handsome face, but only for a moment. Then she smiled again and clutched Prince Vasili's arm more tightly. "Listen to me, Prince," she said. "I have never yet asked you for anything, and I never will again. Nor have I ever reminded you of my father's friendship for you. But now I entreat you for God's sake to do this for my son, and I shall always regard you as a benefactor," she added hurriedly. "No, don't be angry, but promise. I have asked Golitsyn, and he has refused." "Soyez le bon enfant que vous avez été," she said, trying to smile, though tears were in her eyes. "Papa, we shall be late," said Princess Helene, turning her beautiful head and looking over her classically molded shoulder as she stood waiting by the door. Influence in society, however, is capital which has to be economized if it is to last. Prince Vasili knew this, and having once realized that if he asked on behalf of all who begged of him, he would soon be unable to ask for himself, he became chary of using his influence. But in Princess Drubetskaya's case, he felt, after her second appeal, something like qualms of conscience. She had reminded him of what was quite true. He had been indebted to her father for the first steps in his career. Moreover, he could see by her manner that she was one of those women, mostly mothers, who, having once made up their minds, will not rest until they have gained their end, and are prepared, if necessary, to go on insisting, day after day and hour after hour, and even to make scenes. This last consideration moved him. "Chère Anna Mikhailovna," said he with his usual familiarity and wariness of tone, "it is almost impossible for me to do what you ask, but to prove my devotion to you and how I respect your father's memory, I will do the impossible. Your son shall be transferred to the Guards. Here is my hand on it. Are you satisfied?" "My dear benefactor, this is what I expected from you. I knew your kindness." He turned to go. "Wait, just a word. Une fois passé aux gardes," she faltered, "you are on good terms with Mikhail Ilyarovich Kutuzov. Recommend Boris to him as an adjutant. Then I shall be at rest, and then—" Prince Vasili smiled. "No, I won't promise that. You don't know how Kutuzov is pestered since his appointment as commander-in-chief. He told me himself that all the Moscow ladies have conspired to give him all their sons as adjutants." "No, but do promise. I won't let you go, my dear benefactor." "Papa," said his beautiful daughter in the same tone as before, "we shall be late." "Well, au revoir, goodbye. You hear her?" "Then tomorrow you will speak to the Emperor?" "Certainly, but about Kutuzov I don't promise." Do promise, Basile," cried Anna Mikhailovna as he went, with a smile of coquettish girl, which at one time probably came naturally to her, but was now very ill suited to her careworn face. Apparently she had forgotten her age, and by force of habit employed all the old feminine arts. But as soon as the prince had gone, her face resumed its former cold, artificial expression. She returned to the group where the Vicomte was still talking, and again pretended to listen, while waiting till it would be time to leave. The task was accomplished. "And what do you think of this latest comedy, du Sacre de Milan?" asked Anna Pavlovna. "Et la nouvelle comédie du peuple de Genet et Luc qui vient présenter leurs vœux à Monsieur Bonaparte. Monsieur Bonaparte assis sur un trône et exaucant les vœux des nations. Adorable. Non mais c'est à en devenir folle. On dirait que le monde entier a perdu la tête." Prince Andrei looked Anna Pavlovna straight in the face with a sarcastic smile. "Dieu me la donne, car à qui la touche." Bonaparte's words at his coronation. "On dit qu'il a été très bon en prononçant ces paroles," he remarked, repeating the words in Italian. "Dio mi la donna, guai a chi la tocca." "J'espère enfin que ça a été la goutte d'eau qui fera déborder le verre," Anna Pavlovna continued. "Les souverains ne peuvent plus supporter cet homme qui menace tout." "Les souverains? Je ne parle pas de la Russie," said the Vicomte, polite but hopeless. "Les souverains, madame? Qu'ont-ils fait pour Louis XVII, pour la reine, pour Madame Élisabeth? Rien. Et croyez-moi, ils subissent la punition pour leur trahison de la cause de Bourbon. Les souverains? Ils envoient des ambassadeurs complimenter l'usurpateur." And sighing disdainfully, he again changed his position. Prince Hippolyte, who had been gazing at the Vicomte for some time through his lorgnette, suddenly turned completely round towards the little princess, and having asked for a needle, began tracing the Condé coat of arms on the table. He explained this to her with as much gravity as if she had asked him to do it. "Bâton de gueule, engrêlé de gueule d'Assur. Maison Condé," said he. The princess listened, smiling. "If Bonaparte remains on the throne of France a year longer," the Vicomte continued, with the air of a man who, in a matter with which he is better acquainted than anyone else, does not listen to others, but follows the current of his own thoughts, "things will have gone too far. By intrigues, violence, exile and executions, French society, good French society, will have been forever destroyed, and then—" He shrugged his shoulders and spread out his hands. Pierre wished to make a remark, for the conversation interested him, but Anna Pavlovna, who had him under observation, interrupted. "The Emperor Alexander," said she, with the melancholy which always accompanied any reference of hers to the imperial family, "has declared that he will leave it to the French people themselves to choose their own form of government. And I believe that once free from the usurper, the whole nation will certainly throw itself into the arms of its rightful king," she concluded, trying to be amiable to the royalist emigrant. "That is doubtful," said Prince Andrei. "Monsieur le Vicomte quite rightly supposes that matters have already gone too far. I think it will be difficult to return to the old regime." "From what I have heard," said Pierre, blushing and breaking into the conversation, "almost all the aristocracy has already gone over to Bonaparte's side." "It is the Bonapartists who say that," replied the Vicomte without looking at Pierre. "At the present time it is difficult to know the real state of French public opinion." "Bonaparte l'a dit," remarked Prince Andrei with a sarcastic smile. It was evident that he did not like the Vicomte and was aiming his remarks at him, though without looking at him. "Je leur ai montré le chemin de la gloire, ils n'en ont pas voulu," Prince Andrei continued after a short silence, again quoting Napoleon's words. "Je leur ai ouvert mes antichambres, ils se sont précipités en foule. Je ne sais pas à quel point il a eu le droit de le dire." Aucun, replied the Vicomte. After the murder of the Duc, even the most partial ceased to regard him as a hero. Si même ça a été un héros pour certains champs, he went on, turning to Anna Pavlovna, depuis l'assassinat du Duc, qu'il y a un martyr de plus dans le ciel, un héros moins sur la terre. Before Anna Pavlovna and the others had time to smile their appreciation of the Vicomte's epigram, Pierre again broke into the conversation, and though Anna Pavlovna felt sure he would say something inappropriate, she was unable to stop him. The execution of the Prince Herzog Ingiensky, declared Monsieur Pierre, was a political necessity, and it seems to me that Napoleon showed greatness of soul by not fearing to take on himself the whole responsibility of that deed. Dieu, mon Dieu, muttered Anna Pavlovna in a terrified whisper. Comment, Monsieur Pierre? Vous trouvez que l'assassinat est grandeur d'âme? Said the little princess, smiling and drawing her work nearer to her. Ah, oh, exclaimed several voices. Capital, said Prince Hippolyte in English, and began slapping his knee with the palm of his hand. The Vicomte merely shrugged his shoulders. Pierre looked solemnly at his audience over his spectacles and continued. I say so, he continued desperately, because the Bourbons fled from the revolution, leaving the people to anarchy, and Napoleon alone understood the revolution and quelled it. And so, for the general good, he could not stop short for the sake of one man's life. Won't you come over to the other table? Suggested Anna Pavlovna, but Pierre continued his speech without heeding her. No, cried he, becoming more and more eager. Napoleon is great because he rose superior to the revolution, suppressed its abuses, preserved all that was good in it, equality of citizenship and freedom of speech and of the press, and only for that reason did he obtain power. Yes, if having obtained power without availing himself of it to commit murder, he had restored it to the rightful king, I should have called him a great man, remarked the Vicomte. He could not do that. The people only gave him power that he might rid them of the Bourbons, and because they saw that he was a great man. The revolution was a grand thing, continued Monsieur Pierre, betraying by his desperate and provocative proposition his extreme youth and his wish to express all that was in his mind. What? Revolution and regicide a grand thing? Well, after that... But won't you come to this other table? Repeated Anna Pavlovna. Contraste social, said the Vicomte with a tolerant smile. I am not speaking of regicide, I am speaking about ideas. Yes, ideas of robbery, murder and regicide, again interjected an ironical voice. Those were extremes, no doubt, but they are not what is most important. What is important are the rights of man, emancipation from prejudices, and equality of citizenship, and all these ideas Napoleon has retained in full force. Liberty and equality, said the Vicomte contemptuously, as if at last deciding seriously to prove to this youth how foolish his words were, high-sounding words, which have long been discredited. Who does not love liberty and equality? Even our Saviour preached liberty and equality. Have people since the revolution become happier? On the contrary, we wanted liberty, but Bonaparte has destroyed it. Prince Andrei kept looking with an amused smile from Pierre to the Vicomte and from the Vicomte to their hostess. In the first moment of Pierre's outburst, Anna Pavlovna, despite her social experience, was horror-struck. But when she saw that Pierre's sacrilegious words had not exasperated the Vicomte and had convinced herself that it was impossible to stop him, she rallied her forces and joined the Vicomte in a vigorous attack on the orator. Mais mon cher Monsieur Pierre, said she, how do you explain the fact of a great man executing a duke, or even an ordinary man, who is innocent and untried? I should like, said the Vicomte, to ask how Monsieur explains the 18th Brumaire. Was not that an imposture? C'est un escamotage qui ne ressemble nullement à la manière d'agir d'un grand homme. And the prisoners he killed in Africa, that was horrible, said the little princess, shrugging her shoulders. C'est un roturier, vous aurez beau dire, remarked Prince Hippolyte. Monsieur Pierre, not knowing whom to answer, looked at them all and smiled. His smile was not like the others, verging on a non-smile. When he smiled, his grave, even rather gloomy look was instantaneously replaced by another, a childlike, kindly, even rather silly look, which seemed to ask forgiveness. The Vicomte, who was meeting him for the first time, saw clearly that this young Jacobin was not so terrible as his words suggested. All were silent. "How do you expect him to answer you all at once?" said Prince Andrei. "Besides, in the actions of a statesman one has to distinguish between his acts as a private person, as a general, and as an emperor. So it seems to me." "Yes, yes, of course," Pierre chimed in, pleased at the arrival of this reinforcement. "One must admit," continued Prince Andrei, "that Napoleon as a man was great on the bridge of Arcole, and in the hospital at Jaffa, where he gave his hand to the plague-stricken. But there are other acts which it is difficult to justify." Prince Andrei, who had evidently wished to tone down the awkwardness of Pierre's remarks, rose and made a sign to his wife that it was time to go. Suddenly Prince Hippolyte started up, making signs to everyone to attend, and asking them all to be seated, began. "Ah, aujourd'hui on m'a raconté une anecdote moscovite, charmante. Il faut que je vous en régale. Vous m'excusez, Vicomte, il faut que je raconte en russe. Autrement, on ne sentira pas le sel de l'histoire." And Prince Hippolyte began to tell his story in such Russian as a Frenchman would speak after spending about a year in Russia. Everyone waited, so emphatically and eagerly did he demand their attention to his story. "In Moscow a lady, une dame, and she is very stingy. She must have 2 valets de pied behind her carriage, and very big ones. That was her taste. And she had une femme de chambre, also big, she said." Here Prince Hippolyte paused, evidently collecting his ideas with difficulty. "She said, oh yes, she said, 'Girl,' à la femme de chambre, 'put on a livret, get up behind the carriage, faire des visites.'" Here Prince Hippolyte spluttered and burst out laughing long before his audience, which produced an effect unfavorable to the narrator. Several persons, among them the elderly lady and Anna Pavlovna, did, however, smile. "She went. Suddenly there was a great wind. The girl lost her hat, and her long hair came down." Here he could contain himself no longer and went on between gasps of laughter. "And the whole world knew." And so the anecdote ended. Though it was unintelligible why he had told it, or why it had to be told in Russian, still Anna Pavlovna and the others appreciated Prince Hippolyte's social tact in so agreeably ending Pierre's unpleasant and unamiable outburst. After the anecdote, the conversation broke up into insignificant small talk about the last and next balls, about theatricals, and who would meet whom, and when, and where. This is the end of chapter 4.